very interesting discussion, which affects all of us, not just millennials, as we think about the future of work. I'd really like to kick off, though, by talking with Felicity, who is at MYOB, and just your lens on what Monica has been talking about. Does this mirror the experiences you're having in your own company?
Yeah, look, it absolutely aligns with all of the things that we're focused on, particularly around the flex piece. And we know that flex is actually quite a driver towards the gig economy as well. And so that's a real focus for us in terms of how can we create more flexibility for our current workforce, and therefore how are we best prepared as we start to move into that changing shape of the workforce and more independent gig workers coming on board as well.
Can you just give us a little bit of, detail and exactly what you are doing before we pass to the other panellists?
Sure. So just recently we've introduced a new initiative around flexibility, and like many organisations we've had a flexibility policy for a while, but what we found was the experience for our people is quite inconsistent depending on their manager and their manager's mindset around flexibility. And we also found that it was very focused on just the individual. So it was more about what's the right flex for a particular person, and we weren't really focusing on how do we make that effective for a team and how do we make that truly sustainable. And there's really no one-size-fits-all approach to flex. And look, we know that flex isn't just about working part-time or for parents, so there's so many more options out there, and we really wanted to create a much more inclusive flex culture for our people. So we focus on flex time, flex place, flex choice, and recently introduced flex leave as well. So an additional 5 days leave for team members that they can use that leave for any purpose. We know some use it for the side hustles that Monica talked about, and some are using it just for simply well-being. They are looking for a break, wanting to spend more time with family, maybe training for an Ironman, something like that. We've found that that's getting really great engagement and response as well.
Mm-hmm. And Amy, I mean, your experience is quite different. You've come out of a professional environment and you've been a diplomat, you've worked in the beehive, you've done all those things, but you've also spotted a gap in the market, and to some degree the company you've set up has been conditioned by your own experience as a working professional who needs flexibility. Just give us a bit of a window into that.
Absolutely. As a friend said, I've created a business about flexibility to create flexibility for myself. I think I'm pretty typical, actually, of a professional woman in that I had my children later. I was 30 when I was pregnant with my first child. I had tertiary qualifications. I had years of experience, and I wanted to continue progressing my career, but I also wanted to be able to spend time with my children. And so flexible working became really important to me. And so now I've created a business where I work from home, so I'm not commuting to the office each day. I'm there to drop the kids at school in the morning, and I'm there in the afternoon. I work flexible working hours. I'm quite often working in the evening, but that means I'm around in the afternoon for my children. So I've created, and I've realised too, that it's not just a working parents issue, and I say for mothers and fathers it's a critical issue, but it's some of these demographic trends which Monique was talking about, not just for millennials, but the ageing workforce is a really critical change that's affecting New Zealand. In the 90s, around 6% of people over the age of 65 were working. Today it's around 22%, and that's going to continue to grow. So we need to actually retain older workers in the workforce. I read recently that 44% of GPs plan to retire within the next 10 years. That's critical for New Zealand to be thinking about. So we're going to be working longer, and we're going to be healthier for longer. So we need to think about how flexible work can encourage people to retain their skills in the workforce.
Elizabeth, it all seems like a very positive scenario for the future, but from the work you've done academically, there are a few pitfalls that we should be thinking about.
Yes. So building off of what Monica was talking about earlier, people with multiple gigs or hustles or whatever. Some of the research that I've done suggests that it's really hard to transition from, say, a side gig into, if you want, a full-time permanent job. It's just really difficult. So we followed people over a 10-year period, and we looked at that, and the likelihood of you getting into full-time permanent jobs really goes down if you started off in a side gig. So that's one. But the second thing, when I think about, for example, bringing in older workers into the workplace, bringing in different types of people, the research shows that you really have to think carefully about what opportunities this provides them, what opportunities, what challenges it presents their workmates. And so it is a more, you have to think about the psychology of the whole group, not just of the individual as you place them in a position.
And what are the kind of factors there? I mean, if you're thinking from a boomer perspective, and a large number of us will be over 65 soon. So, I mean, when you're thinking about that, merging boomers with this big cohort called the millennials, who sound a lot more resilient, but is that really the case?
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% convinced, and I don't think the research supports that people are that very different. I think we are affected by the context in which we grew up, but people are people, and everyone looks for meaning and purpose. I don't think it's just the young people. I think it's older people look for meaning and purpose, and all of that needs to be taken into consideration as you design jobs for the future, and as you design the future, it's humans in that future, and that needs to be part of the conversation.
Chris, I guess it all starts with the education system and the need to create more resilient individuals coming through. I mean, what are you designing in the education system to enable this to happen?
Well, I think one of the big challenges in the education system is we've operated on a 19th century educational model where we're aiming to front load as much education as possible on a sort of a just-in-case basis into young people, and then send them out into the world and say, that's it, you're good to go. When the reality is learning is a lifelong thing now, and people have to dip in and out of it, engage with it, not necessarily in the same formalised sense that they used to, but actually on a much more informal, regular, daily basis. And the education system, I think, is still grappling with that. And that's got big implications for the education workforce. You know, we saw teachers yesterday talking about the enormous workloads that they have. And part of the reason for that is that we're still asking them to work within a model of education that increasingly is pushing against the lives that people are living. And that's creating enormous challenges. And you know, New Zealand's not alone in grappling with this. I think around the globe, governments and countries are only really just starting to get to grips with the fact that the changes, the scale of change that education is going to require in the next decade is radical and huge.
But are teachers actually equipped to teach, I guess, people about how to be more resilient? I mean, they've come up through a system themselves.
It's interesting. I mean, Alvin Toffler, the American futuristic writer, said that the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write. It'll be those who can't learn, unlearn and relearn.
Right.
And so actually when we think about what are we equipping young people with, the types of skills and dispositions are far more important than the sort of subject-specific knowledge. So that how are we equipping young people to be resilient, adaptable, have good communication skills, have that ability to unlearn something and learn something new, and do all of that spontaneously and regularly? That's actually where we want to focus our educational experience at that early front end, rather than saying you must know these particular skills or these particular facts, because they change.
But don't you need a solid platform of learning anyway before you become a solopreneur working in a company?
And I think one of the issues then, if you think of this model of lifelong learning, is who's going to pay for it? Because right now what's happened, or what happened, say, 30 years ago, was companies took on the job of training their employees. But now that you're pushing people out of work, who's going to pay for their training? It's not the companies. The risk seems to be almost entirely on the individual worker. And I think that's a question for society, not just for companies, not just for the individuals or educators, for all of us. How are we going to create a society that enables and funds and pays for everyone to go on this lifelong learning mission.
Monica, this might be a nice point to bring you in again, because you have fostered an environment where you do have people who have side hustles as well. But I mean, does the company actually encourage and help with bridging people to that next phase in a changing world of work?
Yeah, I mean, Lion Ventures, we're in an interesting space because we're operating like a startup hustle, but we are still within a bigger company, right? So we still have the parent company, Lion, looking after us. So we work with a number of people that are genuinely doing the small hustles, and the responsibility does fall on them from that training point of view. And that is something we need to think about as we go forward, is how do we support that economy and those people on that journey? Absolutely.
And I think for employers, it's also recognising that people mid-career might be taking time out to study, to retrain, and not seeing a CV with a gap and thinking that's a negative, but actually it's a positive.
And look, I'd add to that as well, the work that we've been doing, starting to look at what the careers of the future look like, we absolutely recognise that within our workforce at MYOB, we do have jobs or tasks within jobs that won't exist in the not too distant future. And our focus is really on protecting people, not the jobs. So what is it that we can be doing to help people upskill, reskill, relearn, as opposed to just saying, this role isn't going to exist and what are you going to be doing about it? We absolutely accept that there is an important role that we play in helping people to upskill into the newer jobs that are created and the other demands as well.
I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of people out in the workforce now who don't have the luxury of being able to say, I'm going to take a gap from paid employment now and go and reskill and re-equip myself for a new job. Actually, they need to continue to earn and learn at the same time. And a lot of our education system, again, is not designed to be able to cope with that, to provide those learning opportunities while people are in the workforce and learning. And that creates really big challenges as well for the people working in education to be able to cater for that need in a way that we're doing a bit of it, but we're not doing anywhere near enough of it.
I mean, there's been some work done recently also, Chris, that you'd be across for the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council, which has been looking at a pledge from large companies to actually be involved and help fund that training.
Yeah, and look, we know that there are some industries where there is a real culture of on-job learning, particularly those who had a more traditional apprenticeship culture. So take building and construction, it's an ingrained part of that industry that you have on-job learning. But actually, increasingly in the new kind of workforces, the emerging workforces, we've got to embed that kind of same culture. And one of the challenges I think that we've also got to grapple with is that there are a group of workers who are trapped in a cycle of low-paid employment to a benefit to another form of low-paid employment in this gig economy, and we're not giving them the opportunities to lift out of that cycle and develop the type of skills that will lead them to more sustainable employment or leveraging off their existing employment to get into better employment. We're sort of trapping them in that perpetual cycle, and we've got to think about what does that mean for the welfare system and the way we think about that. Sometimes we might be better to say to someone, don't go and take the first available job, but actually take some time to re-educate and retrain so that you can get a better job that's going to be more sustainable.
I would like a greater focus on our part-time market, our part-time job market. So again, when you look at part-time work, it's generally low-skilled and low-paid. And if you're trying to provide opportunities for people to be able to retrade while working or be able to remain in the workforce but over the age of 65, look after children, but also be working. Part-time is an essential part of that. Over 70% of part-time workers are women, and yet there's a significant pay gap between full-time and part-time work. So I think that's really important.
I think, but actually also in that, I mean, I think there's still a huge gender bias when it comes to talk about flexible working conditions. I'm a dad. I'm a late-term dad. We started just before in my late 30s, and actually I don't want to be the other party in the parenting relationship. I've got a professional partner who also wants to be working, and I want to be an equal partner in that process, but yet so much of the inbuilt cultural bias assumes that if the kids get sick, it's going to be the woman that takes the time off and uses the flexible working conditions to go and look after them or whatever. And actually, my message is that we dads have an equal share of that responsibility too.
I think you need to talk to Jacinda.
Yeah, but I think we've...
She will understand.
She's actually been pretty good, you know. But you know, I think we do have to grapple with it. And I think the other real challenge about that is when we're talking about flexible working conditions, part-time work and so on, work-life balance actually becomes quite challenging, because how do you resegregate your life in a more flexible working environment? You know, I'm probably in a job where it's almost impossible to get away from it. And so, you know, I go out in public, I take the kids to the playground, and there will be people there who want to talk to me about work. How do I create in that environment the quality time for my own family and for my own kids where that doesn't encroach on it? And I think increasingly everybody in the workforce is grappling with that. You know, we carry our work around in our pockets. And so how do you recreate space for other things?
I mean, we've talked about the millennial cohort, as if they are all confident and super professional and super, I guess, devoted to the employer for the time they're devoted to them when they're not doing the side hustle. So from a managerial perspective, how do you actually ensure you're getting a good bang for the buck? Those of you who are managers.
How do you ensure you're getting good bang for your buck? It comes down to trust, right? And you wouldn't be recruiting people and bringing them on and working with them if you didn't trust them. So it comes down to the people you choose to work with. It has to.
And we don't see a lot of difference within our workforce between the baby boomer generation and millennials, for example. So I understand that there's a lot of discussion around the differences in the generations and what they're looking for, but perhaps if you think about the millennials, it's easier to be more flexible because we are so more enabled through technology that didn't exist for baby boomers. So I think that some of the demands perhaps that we think millennials are making are the same things that baby boomers would want, but the technology didn't exist to enable it for them. And so when we start to talk about flex, we don't see a difference between the demand from millennials versus baby boomers. Everyone's wanting it. We're just now in a better position to actually offer it to both generations.
But not all managers are equipped to manage flexible teams, are they? I mean, when you really get down to it, there are a lot of people around who only think people are working if they're right in front of them. So how do you know, let's just drill down. It is not always as rosy as is being portrayed. So how do you do that? How do you actually find the right managers for managing a flexible workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is one of the challenges. So, and I don't know that it's a case of finding the right managers. I think you have to help them to develop their mindset. And so that's something that that's been a real focus for us in terms of our shift from just a flex policy to actually how do we truly make this part of the culture. And we do have managers that aren't yet feeling confident and capable of leading teams where they're offering a lot of flexibility. So we had an example of a manager where we had provided laptops to all the teams so that when the time came, if they wanted to work flexibly, remotely, etc., at least they had the hardware to do it. And the manager just felt really ill-equipped to actually start having conversations around, well, if half of my team isn't in the office, how do I know what they're doing? And so we've spent quite a lot of time developing support toolkits for our managers. So we work through making sure a manager's ready to start having conversations with their team around managing and leading to outputs rather than hours spent in the office. And we actually focus on getting the team to talk about how flex works best for them. So again, it's no longer about what's best for me versus what's best for Monica. It's actually, well, as a team, if we truly want to embrace this and make this work, what are some of the fundamentals and like a team charter for our team? And so can we agree that there's a particular day we are all in the office? Do we agree on what our communication tools are? There's so many I guess, fundamentals that we don't always think about when we just open up and say, flexibility is great, we should just offer it to everyone. But what are some of those things that are fundamental to making sure it really works? And so ensuring that our managers are well equipped is absolutely critical. And as Monica said, it is about trust too. You've absolutely got to start with trust. We don't hire people that we don't trust, so why do people need to earn trust before they are allowed to start working flexibly?
I think the organisational culture is key, so it shouldn't be between an individual and the manager. It actually should be across the entire organisation, so there's a culture which supports flexible working, and that's where leadership is really critical. So you need your senior leaders to be on board and actually role modelling flexible work.
We're going to very shortly pass to you, the audience, for your questions, but if I could just quickly go around the panel, what would your advice be to somebody thinking about a future career, say they're 15, 16, about what are their steps? Do they go to university? Do they jump straight into a job? What do they do? I mean, I'm quite interested in that.
You're going to start with me.
Yeah.
What would be my advice? I think it has to be follow your passion, right? And skill up wherever you can. So we talked about that portfolio as well, of rounding that out. And it might be that if your passion is to work for a company that gives you the stability, then absolutely that, and round that out with skills. But it is to start with your passion.
There's a fantastic book called The 100-Year Life. If you're born in 1914, you have a 1% chance of living to 100. If you were born in 2007, you have a 50% chance of living to 100 in a developed country on a best practice life expectancy. So I would say for a young worker, it's a long game. You are probably not going to...
You are not going 80 years.
The traditional pattern of education, work, retirement is probably not going to work over a 60-year career. So think about how you're going to fluctuate that 60 years.
Well, look, I get to speak to quite a lot of young people in schools, when I go and visit schools. And I have one single piece of advice for them, which is that above anything else, the thing that's going to determine your future success is your attitude. Above any qualifications you have, any particular skills you've developed, it's actually your attitude that's going to be the single biggest driver. So if you go into your working life with an attitude that you'll keep learning, that you'll be successful, that you'll be a team player, that you will, communicate well, that you'll continue to strive to improve yourself, that attitude is the thing that's going to make you successful.
So I think that I'd actually encourage really embracing a really broad range of opportunities. So yes, there's the learning and what should I be studying and what that might mean. But I think the way that we build resilience and grit is actually through the much broader opportunities that we take on and putting ourselves outside our comfort zone, stepping into things that are new to us, and just really taking a really broad approach to our own personal experiences, because that develops some of those skills that you will be able to apply in your career irrelevant of what you do. So I think that's really important.
And Elizabeth?
It's hard being the last person because everyone else is getting this amazing advice. So I guess what I'd say is keep your options open. But I'd also say for a young person, don't think about organizations, think about society. I have a 12-year-old son. I don't want him to think about work only. I want him to think about being a citizen, about the world and changing that. So keep your options open. Be a broader person than just a managerial, organizational person.
Over to Heather.
Fran, thank you very much. So we have loads of questions coming in on Slido, and thank you for sending them in. The first question I feel like is probably for Monica and Felicity, actually, and this is about culture. So let's start with you, Monica. How do you develop and maintain an internal culture at your workplace when you have satellite workplaces?
How do you? And that's about building strong relationships. That's about building a solid foundation that supports the people when they aren't working when they are working from a distance, so that they've got that relationship and network to leverage, but actually also making it a base level understanding that everyone is still contributing, even if they're not physically present in the office.
What do you think, Felicity?
And look, I'd add to that face-to-face is absolutely important. So let's not pretend that if we've got everyone working remotely that you're going to get that same quality. So I think you still need to find opportunities for face-to-face. Obviously it's not as frequent, but you'd still need to have that to create those relationships as well. So find ways around that and find ways to replicate some of that sort of water cooler conversations that you may have. So how can you create some digital moments that replicate that sort of informal chat? Could make quite a difference too.
Interesting stuff. Quite a few questions, obviously, coming through for Chris Hipkins. So, Chris, I've got two that... Not polite on budget day, I have to say. Nobody's even asked you how much money you've got. Missed opportunity. Chris, a couple of questions are very similar, so I'm going to fold them into one. Access to education will be vitally important for the gig economy. So how do you see education changing to support our children to be prepared for the new jobs that don't exist already?
I think one of the key things is there'll be much more of a focus on on-job learning. So people will be learning through doing a lot more in the future. And funnily enough, that's kind of actually going back to a form of education that we as humans used to do much better quite some time ago. So I think you'll see a lot more of a focus on that type of learning. I think the New Zealand curriculum in schools actually really grapples with this, and the whole front part of our curriculum now, the whole first half of our curriculum, is about those skills and dispositions that young people are going to need to leave school with. And I think that we're going to see schools focusing a lot more on those things in order to equip people for that, learn, unlearn, relearn work in life that they're going to have.
How do you teach that?
That's a real challenge, but actually you teach through experiences, and really, schools have always done this, but I think that we're basically giving them license to do more of it. More of a focus on the interpersonal interactions between young people in school. Actually, really transformational teachers have always done that, and actually what we're saying to them is that's no longer an add-on to the job, that's an integral part of the job.
Yeah. Amy, thanks very much, Chris. Amy, for you, I'm guessing this is coming from a lot of employers. It's a fair question. How do you ensure productivity in a flexible workplace?
Well, Monica's already made the point that we're productive 3 hours a day. Flexible working, the research shows that you are more productive, and the Perpetual Guardian research showed that working 4 days a week, people at least maintained that productivity of somebody working 5 days per week. So it's really a focus on output, not on hours. And I spoke a couple of weeks ago about the fact at university you hand in an assignment and nobody says to you, how many hours did you spend on the assignment? Where did you write the assignment, and what time of the day did you do the assignment? You're simply judged on the assignment.
Yeah.
Did you do a good job or not? And I can't see why in a workplace we can't have a greater focus on output and less focus on, are you doing the job in the office at a certain time?
Total mindset shift for some people,
It is
I'd
a
imagine.
mind shift.
This is a really interesting one, and I think we're going to give this one to you, Elizabeth. Do you believe a universal basic income is a necessary, practical, plausible policy for the gig economy? Why the look?
It's because I'm really interested in this topic.
Yeah.
And I think whoever's asked this question is spot on, because this is a social question. And I've been watching the Finnish experiment, and there have been a few experiments on this universal basic income. I think it's someplace we're going to have to go. I'm not quite sure. I don't have the answer, but I think, yes, if you are going to talk about people skilling and learning and lifelong learning, there's a lot of risk in that. So how do we provide the basis for it?
So Gareth Morgan didn't have everything wrong. So he was the big universal basic income guy, by the way. Another question that I think you might be able to answer is, what is next, right? We've had this for years. How does it develop? How does it transform?
I think it's just going to be accelerated. So we're just going to have more of it quicker, facilitated by technology, by the new people coming into the workforce. So I think it's just going to be more faster.
Okay. Chris, what support has the government given to the gig economy? And after you've asked it, I would like just a whip around from everybody's thoughts on Chris's answer. Sorry, mate.
Thanks. Look, I think you'll find that the reforms of vocational education that we're working on at the moment, this is actually one of the key drivers behind that. We can't keep doing what we've always done, even if we can somehow make it profitable, which clearly it isn't at the moment. But even if we could, the needs have changed, and therefore, we've got to rethink what we mean by vocational education and how we deliver it. So I think that's one of the big shifts. I think if you look at the welfare advisory group's report, they're really grappling with these issues around, what does income, wealth, and welfare mean in the current economy, and it's actually quite different to what it meant in an industrial-dominated economy. And so, I think we're in the early stages of really doing things around shifting the way government operates to better reflect the way New Zealanders now live, which is very, very different to the way government is equipped to interact with them.
Okay. Monica, can I start with you and then work around the panel? If you could ask for one thing from the government to support the gig economy, what would it be?
I guess it's an attitude change, right? That's what we've talked about. It's the real shift in the way it's working, and so it's the progressive mindset, yeah.
Amy?
I think it's great that the government has committed to all government agencies being flexible by default by the end of 2020, and I would really like that to be genuinely flexible by default. So I think if the government can lead in that way, then that would be a fantastic example for the rest of our workforce to follow.
So, look, I'd question whether the current employment legislation landscape truly supports a gig economy worker. We know that the regulations and the legislation is very much set up around that permanent employee, and so it can make it challenging. There's less security, there's less protection for the gig worker, and it makes it more challenging for an employer to work with a workforce of increasing number of gig workers. So I do think at some point in time we need to relook at the legislative landscape for employment. Absolutely.
Elizabeth?
So I'm going to be a little bit different. I think that we operate in a data-free zone most of the time, and so it's my uncle's third cousin's experience in gig work was like this, and therefore that's what it is. I would encourage the government to collect data, to collect information, commit to doing it over a long period of time to see how this thing is unfolding. Otherwise, all our actions are sort of just instinctive.
I think that's a really, really good point. One of the issues that I've been grappling with in the last few weeks is the contracted public sector workforce. So the people who don't actually work for government departments or agencies but are contracted through them, and they're often the people doing the lowest skilled, lowest paid work, so cleaners and all of that. And we just have no information about that whole workforce, and it's a very, very large workforce. And so I think that's a really good point. We've actually got to get serious about collecting information so that we understand what we're grappling with.
Yes.
Look, final question, because we are very short on time. I just want a very quick answer from everybody. This has come through on Slido, and it's a really good question. With flexible working, the problem is you can find yourself in a position where you are always on. You're never able to actually escape work. So, very quickly, a tip from each of you, starting with you again, Monica. What is your advice to somebody who is in a flexible working environment? How do they turn it off?
It's tough. I mean, I work flexibly myself, and it's tough. And you've just got to be really, really committed to that work-life balance that you want to have, and knowing that you don't want to spend all your life working, and that's why you're working flexibly. So, knowing how to schedule it and to manage yourself so that you can turn it off and relax. Yeah.
Amy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and just setting limits. Having good boundaries. But I think also we've artificially separated work and family for a long time. It's sort of, again, a product of the Industrial Revolution, in that family is very separate from work. I've blended it. So I'm quite often with my children doing some work, but I think that's acceptable as well. Yeah. But having limits around how you make that work is really important.
Chris, we know how you do it. You go to MITRE 10 with the kids.
We do. But actually, there's that TV advertisement where the parent turns the Wi-Fi off at home.
Yeah.
You know, I think families increasingly are going to make an effort to do that sort of thing. Actually say, well, we're turning all the devices off for an hour now, and we're actually going to talk to each other and interact with each other. And that's what we're trying to do a bit at home as well. So, you know, put the phones in the bedroom for an hour and actually just talk to each other.
Interesting.
And look, I agree.
Good luck.
You need to you need to find the right balance for yourself. And as Amy said, like some people are really comfortable with that blend and they don't feel like they're always on. But I'd suggest that if you're feeling like you are, you will be working with other people that feel the same way. So again, are you having conversations with the people that you work closest with that says, what are our expectations of each other? Should we be answering emails at 10 o'clock at night? And I think it's not just about you, it's about talking to the people that you work with to really set some sort of clear boundaries as well.
Right. Finally, Elizabeth.
I agree with everybody else.
What a way to end it diplomatically. Hey, please join me in welcoming our panel today. Monica Yianakis, Amy Prebble, Professor Elizabeth George, Chris Hipkins, Felicity Brown and Fran O'Sullivan.